listen to me carefully, because this moment is not accidental. The worry that has been stealing your sleep, the pressure tightening your chest, the questions circling your mind late at night, God has already seen them. Before your thoughts formed words, before your fears learned your name, God was already standing in your tomorrow. You are not surrounded by chaos, you are surrounded by divine awareness. And the reason you are hearing this right now is because God is calling you out of worry and into trust. Worry is loud. It shouts worst-case scenarios. It rehearses disaster. It pretends to be wisdom, but it is not. Worry is the voice that says, what if? While God is the voice that says, I already am. Worry focuses on what you cannot control, but God governs what you cannot even imagine. When you worry, you carry a burden you were never designed to lift. When you trust, you place that burden into hands that shape the universe. Stop worrying, not because your problems are small, but because God is great. You have been trying to figure everything out, trying to plan every outcome, trying to protect yourself from pain by predicting the future. But listen, your mind was never meant to replace God. Your strength was never meant to compete with divine power. The more you worry, the more you're silently declaring that everything depends on you, and that is exhausting. God never asked you to carry the weight of tomorrow. God asked you to walk faithfully today. Some of you are worried because you feel delayed. You look at your life and say, why is this taking so long? But delay is not denial, and silence is not absence. God works deeply before God works visibly. Roots grow in darkness before fruit appears in light. What you call waiting, God calls preparing. What you call stillness, God calls alignment. If God has not released it yet, it is because you're being shaped to carry it without losing yourself. Worry makes you forget what God has already done. It narrows your vision until all you can see is the problem in front of you. But faith widens your sight until you remember every door God opened, every rescue God performed, every impossible situation God turned around. You are still here. You survived what you thought would destroy you. That alone is evidence that God has been handling things long before you learned how to pray properly. There are battles you are fighting in your mind that were never meant to be fought there. You replay conversations. You imagine confrontations that never happened. You suffer twice, once in your thoughts and once in reality, if it ever comes. God does not live in imagined futures. God lives in eternal now. And when you step into trust, you step into that divine present where grace is sufficient and strength is renewed. Let me speak directly to your heart. Worrying does not protect you. It does not prepare you. It does not prevent pain. It only drains you. Worry is like sitting in a rocking chair. It gives you something to do but takes you nowhere. Trust, on the other hand, moves mountains you cannot even see yet. Trust invites God into places worry keeps closed. Some of you are worried about provision. You look at numbers, resources, responsibilities, and you wonder how everything will add up. But God is not limited by your calculations. God does not need favorable conditions to provide. God creates provision where none seems possible. When you focus on what you lack, you forget who your source is. God is not your backup plan. God is the plan. Others are worried about people, what they think, what they might do, what they might take from you, but God is your defender. God sees every intention, every hidden motive, every silent attack. You do not need to explain yourself to everyone. You do not need to fight every battle. Some battles are won by staying still and letting God speak on your behalf. Worry also comes when you feel out of control. You want certainty, guarantees, visible proof. But faith begins where control ends. If you could handle everything yourself, you would not need God. The discomfort you feel is not weakness. It is the invitation to surrender. And surrender is not giving up, it is giving over. God handles everything, not because you are passive, but because God is sovereign. You still act, you still move, you still obey, but you do so from a place of trust, not panic. You move with peace, not pressure. You work with diligence, not desperation. When God is handling things, you can breathe again. Some of you are carrying guilt and regret, worrying about past mistakes. You replay them thinking they disqualified you, but God is not trapped in your past. God redeems, restores, and repurposes. What you thought ruined you may become the very thing that refines you. Stop worrying about what cannot be changed and start trusting the one who changes hearts, directions, and destinies. There is also worry born from comparison. See others advancing, succeeding, celebrating, and you feel left behind. But God does not copy destinies. God customizes them. Your timing is not wrong, it is specific. Your path is not inferior, it is intentional. When you compare, you insult the wisdom of God's design for your life. Let me tell you something powerful. God is not stressed. God is not anxious. God is not pacing back and forth, wondering how things will work out. Heaven is not in crisis mode. If God is at peace, you can be at peace. If God is in control, you can rest. Your calm is not in now, it is alignment with divine reality. Worry shrinks your soul. Trust expands it. Worry pulls you inward. Trust lifts your eyes upward. When you trust God, you are not ignoring reality. You are anchoring yourself in a greater one. You are saying, I may not understand, but I believe. And belief is the doorway through which God's power flows. Some of you are afraid of loss, losing stability, losing relationships, losing opportunities. But God is the giver and the keeper. What God gives, no one can steal. What God removes, God replaces with something deeper, stronger, and more aligned. You have never lost anything that God could not restore in a greater form. Your worry has been loud because your trust has been quiet. It is time to reverse that. Speak trust, walk trust, breathe trust. Let your actions reflect confidence in God's ability to handle what you cannot. When you wake up, instead of listing fears, acknowledge God's presence. When challenges arise, instead of panicking, pause. That pause is where divine strength enters. You do not have to understand the process to trust the outcome. You don't need all the answers to take the next step. God rarely reveals the full picture because faith grows in steps, not leaps. Obedience today unlocks clarity tomorrow. There are things God is doing behind the scenes that your worry cannot see. Connections being aligned, doors being prepared, delays being used for protection. If you could see what God is preventing, you would thank God for unanswered prayers and closed paths. Trust is thanking God even before you see the evidence. Worry makes you feel alone. Trust reminds you that you are accompanied. God is not distant. God is not indifferent. God is intimately involved in the details of your life. Nothing is too small. Nothing is too complex. Nothing is beyond divine reach. You were never meant to live with a clenched heart. Peace is not a luxury, it is a gift. And that gift is activated when you let God handle what you were never meant to control. Lay it down, the fear, the timeline, the need to have everything figured out. God is not asking you to be fearless. God is asking you to be faithful. Every time you choose trust over worry, something shifts inside you. Your perspective changes, your strength renews, your spirit lifts. You begin to see opportunities where you once saw obstacles. That is not coincidence. That is alignment with God's nature. Some of you are on the edge of breakthrough, but worry is blinding you to it. You are so focused on how it might fail that you cannot see how close you are to success. God often answers prayers at the point of greatest tension. Do not quit in the waiting. Do not give up in this silence. Trust matures in moments like these. Remember this, God has never failed. Not once, not ever. History, testimony, and your own life prove it. The same God who carried you through before will carry you again. You are not facing this alone. You never were. There is a moment when worry feels responsible, when fear disguises itself as caution, when anxiety pretends to be maturity. But understand this truth deeply. Worry is not wisdom. Worry is resistance to trust. It is the soul saying, I am afraid to let go. Yet God never asked you to abandon responsibility. God asked you to abandon fear. Responsibility acts with clarity. Fear reacts with panic. One is rooted in faith, the other in uncertainty. And God calls you to live from faith, not from fear. You must realize that peace is not the absence of problems. Peace is the presence of God in the middle of them. Many people say, I will stop worrying when everything is fixed. But that day never comes. There will always be another challenge, another decision, another unknown. Peace that waits for perfection will never arrive, but peace that trusts God arrives immediately, even while storms still rage. That is the peace that surpasses logic, the peace that does not depend on circumstances, the peace that flows from knowing who holds the outcome. God does not manage your life the way humans manage projects. God works with eternal vision. While you see moments, God sees movements. While you focus on outcomes, God focuses on transformation. Sometimes the very thing you are worried about is being used by God to strengthen your character, deepen your faith, and prepare you for a level you are not yet ready to sustain. God, I'm more concerned with who you are becoming than what you are receiving. Worry narrows your spiritual hearing. It fills your inner space with noise. But when you quiet your fear, you begin to sense divine guidance more clearly. God does not shout over panic. God speaks into stillness. That is why trust is not passive, it is intentional. You choose to silence fear. You choose to focus your heart. You choose to listen. And in that listening, direction becomes clearer. Some of you are worried because you feel surrounded by uncertainty. You want guarantees, timelines, visible confirmations. But faith does not grow through guarantees. Faith grows through dependence. If God revealed every step, trust would be unnecessary. The unseen is not punishment, it is invitation. God invites you to walk with Him. Not ahead of Him, not behind Him, but with Him. Step by step, breath by breath. Understand this, God's silence is never empty. When God is quiet, something is forming. Seeds grow in silence. Foundations are laid quietly. The loudest miracles are preceded by the quietest preparation. If you learn to trust God in silence, you will not panic when answers delay. You will wait with confidence, knowing that silence does not mean abandonment, it means depth. Worry also distorts your perception of time. It makes you feel rushed, late, behind. But God operates outside of panic. God is never in a hurry. Divine timing is precise, not pressured. What arrives too early becomes burden. What arrives too late loses impact. God releases things when they can bless you, not break you. Trusting timing is an act of worship. Some of you are carrying fear because you feel weak. You think, I don't have enough strength for what's coming. But God never demands strength you do not have. God supplies strength as you move forward. You are not required to store power for the future. You are required to rely on grace in the present. When the moment comes, so will the strength. Worry keeps you trapped in self-focus. Trust lifts you into God-focus. The more you stare at yourself, your limitation, your mistakes, your capacity, the heavier life becomes. But when you shift your focus to God's nature, faithful, just, merciful, powerful, your soul begins to rest. Faith is not denying your weakness. It is leaning into divine sufficiency. There is also a hidden danger in worry. It creates false responsibility. You begin to think that if you stop worrying, things will fall apart. But you were never holding everything together. God was. You were never the source of stability. God was. Releasing worry does not create chaos. It reveals order that was already there, maintained by hands far stronger than yours. God handles everything in ways you cannot predict. Sometimes God removes obstacles. Sometimes God gives you strength to walk through them. Sometimes God changes the situation. Sometimes God changes you, but every response is intentional. Nothing is random. Nothing is wasted. Even what hurts is filtered through divine wisdom. When you worry, you shrink your expectation. You prepare yourself for disappointment. But trust stretches your expectation. It opens your heart to possibility. God often exceeds what you imagine, not because you demanded it, but because generosity is divine nature. Expectation rooted in trust honors God. Expectation rooted in fear dishonors what God is capable of doing. You must learn the discipline of release, not once, but daily. Worry returns because you pick it back up. Release is a practice. Each morning you hand over control. Each moment of anxiety you choose trust again. This is not weakness, it is maturity. The strongest people are not those who control everything, but those who know when to surrender. Some of you are facing decisions, afraid of making the wrong choice, but God is not waiting to punish you for imperfection. God guides willing hearts. If your desire is to honor God, direction will come. Even missteps can be redirected. Trust removes the fear of failure and replaces it with confidence in guidance. God is deeply invested in your growth, not just your comfort. That is why not every prayer is answered the way you expect. Comfort teaches dependence on feelings. Growth teaches dependence on God, and growth lasts longer. What God builds within you will sustain you long after circumstances change. Worry also disconnects you from gratitude. You overlook present blessings because you are consumed by future fears. But gratitude anchors you in the now. It reminds you that God is already working. When you thank God in the middle of uncertainty, you declare trust. You say, I see what you have done and I believe you will continue. Do not underestimate the power of rest. Rest is not laziness, it is trust in action. When you rest, you declare that God is active even when you are still. Rest is resistance against fear. It is a statement of faith that says, I will not be driven by anxiety. God never intended your life to be a constant state of tension. Your heart was designed for peace. Your mind was designed for clarity. When worry dominates, it is a signal that trust needs to be restored, and trust is restored not by effort, but by relationship. By remembering who God is and who you are in that presence. You are not defined by what you fear. You are defined by what you trust. Fear changes daily. God remains constant. Anchor yourself to what does not shift. Anchor yourself to divine faithfulness. As you let go of worry, you will notice something powerful. You begin to move with authority instead of anxiety. You speak with calm instead of panic. You respond with wisdom instead of reaction. That transformation is not psychological, it is spiritual alignment. God handles everything not because you are insignificant, but because you are valued. A loving guardian does not hand heavy burdens to those they care for. God carries what would crush you. Your role is not to carry the weight of the world. Your role is to walk in obedience and trust. Every moment of trust builds spiritual resilience. You become unshaken by uncertainty. You become steady in chaos. That steadiness is testimony. People will see peace on you and wonder how you remain calm. And the answer will not be technique. It would be trust in God who never fails. Let worry lose its authority over you. Let fear release its grip. You were created for peace, sustained by faith and guided by divine wisdom. God is not overwhelmed by your situation. God is already working, already aligning, already sustaining, already providing, already protecting, already guiding, already preparing what comes next, even now, even here, even as you learn to trust more deeply, breathe more freely, and walk forward with quiet confidence, knowing that nothing escapes divine awareness and nothing exceeds divine power. There comes a point in life when worry no longer feels like concern, but like bondage. It dictates your mood, controls your decisions, and drains your joy. But God never created you to live chained to anxiety. You were designed to live anchored in trust. The moment you recognize that worry is stealing what God intends you to enjoy, something awakens inside you. You realize this is not just about feeling better, this is about spiritual alignment. Understand this deeply. Worry is not neutral. It is a signal of misplaced focus. When your focus shifts from God's ability to your limitations, fear grows. But when your focus returns to God's faithfulness, fear begins to lose its voice. What you magnify determines what dominates you. If you magnify the problem, it grows larger in your eyes. If you magnify God, the problem finds its proper size. God never promised you a life without challenges, but God promised presence within them. That presence is not symbolic, it is active. It guides decisions, protects from unseen danger, and opens paths you never planned to take. When you worry, you act as though you are navigating life alone. But you are never alone. Even when you feel abandoned, God is closer than your breath. Some of you are worried because you are standing at a crossroads. You feel the weight of choice. You fear making the wrong move. But God does not abandon sincere seekers to confusion. Direction comes to those who walk in humility and trust. You do not need perfect clarity to move forward. You need faithful intention. God corrects steps taken in faith far more easily than steps frozen by fear. Worry convinces you that delay is dangerous, but many times delay is protection. God sees what you cannot. What looks like stagnation may be preservation. What feels like nothing happening may be everything aligning. If God has slowed you down, it is not to frustrate you. It is to guard you from arriving unprepared. There is also worry that comes from success, the fear of losing what you have gained. But understand this, what God establishes, God sustains. You do not maintain blessings by fear. You maintain them by obedience and gratitude. Fear-driven maintenance will exhaust you. Trust-driven stewardship will strengthen you. God does not operate on scarcity. Even when resources look limited, divine supply is not. When you learn to trust God as your source instead of circumstances, your peace becomes unshakable. Circumstances change, markets shift, people fail, but God remains constant. Some of you are worried because you have been strong for too long. You have carried others, supported families, held responsibilities quietly, and now you feel tired, unseen, stretched thin. But God sees endurance that others overlook. God honors silent faithfulness. The strength you have poured out will be replenished, not because you demanded it, but because God is just. Worry also rises when you confuse responsibility with control. You are responsible to act with wisdom, but you are not responsible to control outcomes. Control belongs to God. When you release control, you do not lose influence, you gain peace. Peace sharpens judgment. Peace steadies the heart. Peace allows you to hear divine guidance without distortion. There is a sacred power in surrender. Surrender is not defeat, it is alignment. When you surrender your fears, your plans, your timelines, you make room for divine intervention. God cannot fill hands that are already clenched. Open hands receive more. Some of you worry because you feel unworthy of good outcomes. You replay past failures and assume the future must punish you for them. But God is not waiting to condemn you. God is waiting to restore you. Growth is not linear. Faith is not about perfection. It is about persistence. And persistence in trust always leads forward. Worry drains imagination. Trust fuels vision. When you trust God, you begin to dream again. You begin to expect goodness. You begin to see beyond survival into purpose. That shift is powerful. God did not call you merely to endure life, but to live it with meaning. Your inner world matters. Worry corrupts it slowly, quietly. Trust heals it gradually, deeply. Every time you choose trust over fear, you strengthen spiritual resilience. You become less reactive, more grounded, less anxious, more discerning. That transformation prepares you for greater responsibility. God often answers worry with wisdom rather than explanation. You may not receive every answer you seek, but you will receive enough clarity to move forward. Trust does not demand explanation. It accepts guidance, and guidance is always sufficient. Some of you are worried about timing, afraid that opportunities are passing you by, but God is not late. What belongs to you cannot miss you. What misses you was never meant to stay. Divine timing is not measured by speed, but by readiness. When worry tries to return, remind your soul of truth. Speak to yourself with authority. Tell your heart that God is fate. Fool. Tell your mind that peace is permitted. Tell your fear that it does not rule here. This is not denial. This is spiritual discipline. God handles everything not by chance, but by intention. Nothing in your life is overlooked. Even your tears are counted. Even your silent prayers are heard. Even your confusion is understood. Trusting God does not remove emotion. It anchors emotion so it does not control you. You are growing even when it feels slow. You are protected even when you feel exposed. You are guided even when the path feels unclear. God is working in layers, seen and unseen, internal and external, immediate and eternal. Let your faith mature beyond desperation. Let it become confidence. Confidence not in outcomes, but in God's character. When you trust character, outcomes lose their power to shake you. Worry will try to tell you that peace is irresponsible. But peace is obedience. Peace says, I acknowledge God's authority. Peace says, I trust divine wisdom. Peace says, I release what I cannot carry. You are not failing because you feel afraid. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to trust God despite it. Every act of trust rewires your spirit. You become calmer, stronger, clearer. And as you continue to let go, something remarkable happens. You begin to experience freedom. Not because everything is perfect, but because you are no longer ruled by fear. God remains in control. God remains faithful. God remains active in every detail of your life, guiding each step, strengthening your heart, steadying your mind, and carrying what you were never meant to bear. As you learn to rest deeper, trust stronger, and walk forward with assurance. CE rooted not in circumstances, but in the unchanging nature of God. There is a deeper layer to this journey of trust that many people overlook. It is the moment when you realize that worry is not only about fear of the future, but also about distrust of divine wisdom. When you worry, you silently question whether God truly knows what is best for you. But God's understanding is not limited by emotion, history, or pressure. Divine wisdom sees the end from the beginning and the beginning from the end at the same time. When you trust that wisdom, you stop demanding explanations and start receiving direction. God is not reactive. God does not wait to see what happens and then respond. Everything unfolds under divine awareness. This is why trust brings rest. You are not waiting for God to act. God is already acting. Your role is not to force outcomes, but to align your heart with what is already being shaped beyond your sight. Many worries are born from the illusion that you are running out of time. But time does not govern God. Seasons change on schedule because God ordains them. Growth happens when conditions are right, not when impatience demands it. When you rush ahead of divine timing, you carry what you were never meant to carry alone. But when you move with God, you move with grace. There is also a sacred mystery in unanswered questions. Not everything needs to be understood to be trusted. Faith matures when it learns to stand without constant reassurance. God is not threatened by your questions, but God is not obligated to answer them on your timeline. Sometimes clarity comes later when understanding will no longer damage your peace. Worry weakens spiritual sensitivity. It keeps your heart tense, your thoughts scattered. But trust sharpens discernment. When you are calm, you recognize opportunities faster. When you are peaceful, you hear guidance more clearly. Anxiety clouds judgment, but trust clears vision. God often allows situations that stretch you beyond your comfort, not to overwhelm you, but to expand your capacity. If everything stayed manageable, your faith would remain shallow. Growth requires tension, but not panic. Trust keeps tension from becoming torment. Some of you are worried because you feel unseen. You are doing the right things quietly, faithfully, without applause. But God sees what people miss. Divine recognition matters more than public recognition. What is unseen by others is never unseen by God. In due time, faithfulness produces fruit that cannot be hidden. Worry also feeds on isolation. It grows louder when you feel disconnected. But God never intended you to face life spiritually alone. Divine presence is constant. Even when human support fails, God remains. When you remember that presence, loneliness loses its power. You must also understand that God values your inner peace more than your outer success. Success without peace becomes a burden. Advancement without trust becomes anxiety. God does not elevate you to impress others. God elevates you to fulfill purpose. And purpose requires stability of heart. Worry often whispers that you are not enough. But God never called you based on sufficiency. God called you based on willingness. Divine strength fills surrendered weakness. You do not need to prove yourself. You need to trust the one who empowers you. There are moments when letting go feels risk. We think, if I stop worrying, I might lose control. But control was never yours to begin with. What you gain through surrender is far greater than what you fear losing. You gain peace that does not depend on outcomes. God handles everything in ways that preserve you. Even when doors close, they close to protect your future. Even when plans collapse, they collapse to redirect your steps. Trust recognizes that disappointment can be a form of divine guidance. Worry makes you live in fragments, part of you in the past, part of you in the future. Trust brings you fully into the present, where grace is available. You cannot access tomorrow's strength today, but today's strength is always enough. God is shaping your resilience quietly. Each time you choose trust over panic, something strengthens inside you. You become less shaken by uncertainty, less controlled by fear. That inner strength prepares you for greater responsibility and deeper impact. Some of you worry because you feel spiritually dry. But dryness does not mean abandonment. Seasons of stillness deepen roots. Faith that survives without constant emotional reward becomes unbreakable. God is working in you even when feelings fade. Worry also steals joy before it arrives. You fear happiness will not last, so you hesitate to embrace it. But joy is not fragile when it is grounded in God. Enjoy what God gives without fear of loss. Gratitude multiplies peace. God does not measure your life by speed or comparison. God measures faithfulness. Every step taken in trust matters, even when progress feels slow. Slow growth is still growth. When worry rises again, and it will, do not condemn yourself. Return to trust gently. Faith is not fragile, it is patient. God does not withdraw because you struggle. God draws closer. You are not forgotten. You are not overlooked. You are not late. You are exactly where divine wisdom allows you to be, learning what you need to learn, releasing what you need to release, and becoming what you need to become. Let trust mature into confidence. Confidence not in yourself alone, but in the unchanging nature of God. When you anchor your heart there, storms lose their authority over you. God is steady. God is faithful. God is active in every layer of your life. As you continue to surrender worry, you will notice peace settling deeper, clarity rising stronger, and courage replacing fear, until trust becomes your natural response and rest becomes your spiritual posture, rooted in the unshakable truth that God is handling everything, seen and unseen, now and always.